gentlemen, it is a day that ends in Y, which means it's the perfect day to talk about 80s wrestling. My name is Jumpin' Jay. Welcome back to another episode of 80s Wrestling, the podcast. And as always, I'm joined live from the Wrestling Collector Studio, Mr. Tommy Real Steel Fierro.
Real Steel? Where'd you get that one from?
Well, the topic of the day is 15 feet high, solid steel cage. And so I thought no better way to introduce you than as the Real Steel, Tommy Fierro. Steel, S-T-E-E-L. Not like you're stealing second base. I'm talking steel cage type steel.
Gotcha.
Tommy, how was it? Tough start to the show because tough week, tough news for wrestling fans. And I know you were a huge fan of this gentleman as a child. Wrestling fans all over the world suffered another tremendous loss. Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, left this earth earlier this week. Tommy, I know you were a huge fan of his. He was a big part of your childhood and your passion for wrestling. How did that news hit you? How are you doing?
Probably the same as every other person listening to this podcast right now. You know, we grew up watching these guys, and I've mentioned it here on the show a few times in the past that my favorite angle ever was when Paul Orndorff turned on Hulk Hogan and went with Bobby Heenan, and just the build up to that match was second to none. The angle, where they're on he's on the telephone trying to get a hold of him, and they have the warm up match against the Moondogs, and then they wrestle against Stud and Bundy, and it as a kid, not knowing the inner workings of the wrestling business. There's no internet or even newsletters at that point. Sitting at home watching that match and seeing Orndorff turn on Hogan, to me, it was like the world stopped. And I mentioned this here on the past on the show. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. I was sitting on my aunt's couch. There was a family party outside, and I just remember sitting there by myself watching this, and it was like time stood still, man. I was in such disbelief that Paul Orndorff would turn his back on Hulk Hogan and go with Bobby Heenan. And they did such a great job building up to that climax and the aftermath also with, them guys working the big event in Canada. And then also, and it's a perfect segue in today's episode. We are talking about the greatest steel cage matches of the 80s. And obviously the big blue steel cage was something that both myself and you, Jay, were huge fans of. And how can you not forget the great Saturday night's main event steel cage match with Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff? And I think we'll start off today's episode talking about that contest because they did such an amazing job of them both falling at the exact same second. Now, back then, there was no huge monitors projected in the arena where the wrestler walking, climbing down the cage could look real quick to see where his opponent was on the other side. I mean, they just timed it absolutely perfect. And that is one finish and one match that is infamous with steel cage matches in the WWF during that time frame.
You're absolutely right. It is one of the first ones that pop into your mind. If we're going to talk about steel cage matches, we have to talk about Hogan, Orndorff, and like you said, it's fitting to start there because of the recent passing of Mr. Wonderful. And unfortunately, seeing the superstars from our childhood pass away is something that wrestling fans have grown much too familiar with. And the very unique thing is because these guys were part of our childhood, we kind of hold them in our mind as forever young. When we picture Paul Orndorff, we still picture him at the height of his career, the shape that he was in, the age that he was in. And so it's just kind of, we know these guys are aging, We know death is a part of life, but it still always seems to be sad and tragic when you hear of a passing. And so our hearts definitely go out to the Orndorff family as they are dealing with this loss. And as wrestling fans, the best we can do is talk about the good times, the highlights. And this cage match is definitely one of them. Because like you're talking about, Tommy, they had one shot to get that ending right. They rolled the dice. It was risky. They had to time it just right. And there are fans on both sides of the cages watching each wrestler drop. And you know, if it wasn't perfectly in sync, if it was off enough that you could notice it, they would have been pointing, they would have been shouting it out. And so what a risk to say, this is going to be our finish. We're going to come down at the exact same time. We'll have some hubbub with the refs, and we'll have to restart the match. But what a huge compliment that is to Mr. Orndorff. Normally in this time, Hogan's going over clean on people. But the fact that they had them drop at the same time and had to restart the match gives credit to Orndorff and the character he was and the belief that Vince McMahon had in him and their feud to have it end that way just to get restarted.
Absolutely, man. And like I said, you hit the nail on the head perfectly. You know, us growing up as fans of wrestling, we want to remember them the way they were. But obviously, everyone ages and everyone grows old. And that's a big reason why I do my 80s wrestling cons, Jay, and I do the virtual signings and signings with 80 guys, and why I spearheaded 80s wrestling social media platforms is because we want to hold on to our childhood. And, you know, that's the best way I can pay homage to something that was such a huge part of my childhood. It wasn't a big part of it. It was my childhood, wrestling. And the best way that I can, you know, pay back all those memories it gave me is by giving them to someone else. And Paul, I actually had the pleasure of having Paul on 3 different conventions throughout the years. And I believe that I was the last convention that he ever did. It was in October of 2019. And I want to say this real quickly. What a great friend Brian Blair is, always has been, and will be to Paul Orndorff. He actually flew because I had the Killer Bees and Paul Orndorff on the same convention, and this is in October 2019. Brian Blair flew from Florida to the Atlanta airport to meet Paul Orndorff at the Atlanta airport, and then got on a plane with Orndorff and came from Atlanta to New Jersey. And that was back the same way. He went back to Atlanta, made sure Paul got there safe, and then hopped on another plane to get back to Florida. So Brian Blair was extremely, extremely close with Paul, and I believe they were best friends. And I just wanted to share the story with everyone and just know how special Paul was to everybody.
It's great when you hear that people in the industry still have that close of a relationship or still that tight with one another and go out of their way to make sure that another one of their brothers is doing well. And so that is a fantastic side story, Tommy. Thank you for sharing that with us. Very cool that you got to meet him on multiple occasions, and the fact that your convention most likely was the last one he visited, because after that convention, you know, the pandemic hit and conventions were kind of shut down. And so that's a very kind of cool piece of history with one of your favorite wrestlers that you have. So that's awesome, Tommy. Let's talk about steel cage matches, Tommy. And I just want to I have a feeling I know exactly where you're going to come from, because I think we're on a similar wavelength along with other fans of this era. But I just would love to know your thoughts on what a cage match meant in the 80s and early 90s compared to what they mean today. How has that changed in your mind? What are your thoughts on cage matches then versus now?
It's completely and totally different, man. Back then, when you put that cage up around the ring, it meant something. and that was an automatic main event at a house show, live event they call now, and it was the big blow off of a feud, and back then, remember, feuds lasted 6 months to a year, sometimes even longer. So, after a while, and they always took their time telling the stories back then because it was a different time frame, and you were able to, tell a more detailed, complex story and let it play out for a while. And at the end of that road, if the feud was hot enough, you would get the big payoff of them stepping inside a steel cage match. And many times, you have a heel manager that was managing the wrestler, and the cage prevented the manager from, interfering or getting involved in the match. Sometimes a cage match was booked that way to keep the outside interference. But, cage matches were gigantic in the 80s. They meant everything. There was no Hell in a Cell back then. There was no Money in the Bank back then. There was no, Elimination Chamber back then. All these big gimmick matches of today. The gimmick match back then was a steel cage match or a battle royal. A battle royal was really, really important to the card back in the 80s. And we can talk about that for a different topic, battle royals of the 80s. That would be an interesting episode as well. But a cage match, man, it was a box office phenomenon back then. You throw up those words steel cage on a poster or put it on the marquee, you damn well sure know that fans are coming out because they know they're going to see something special. And I wish it was like that today. They put a cage up now. It doesn't really mean anything. Unfortunately, I wish that it could or it would, but there's just so many different aspects of it today. They do the war games now in NXT, and the war games is obviously something we'll talk about. Talk about greatest cage matches of the 80s. We got to talk about that. But they have, getting back on track, they have war games for NXT. They have Hell in a Cell. They have Elimination Chamber. They have Money in the Bank. They have all these different gimmick matches now where a cage match kind of, unfortunately falls down the ladder when you're talking about the importance of a gimmick match in the year 2021. A Hell in a Cell is obviously, bigger than a regular steel cage, and so is an Elimination Chamber. And it's more exciting to watch someone climb a ladder and retrieve the Money in the Bank briefcase. So it's a little tougher now to make today's generation of fans that are programmed to this generation's of gimmick matches, etc., to get them that excited for a cage match. I wish that it could be different, but I think that's a main reason why it's not, is because there's so many other big gimmick aspects that they're doing. At least that's my opinion. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think it's one of these scenarios where the more you see it, the less special it becomes. Once you go bigger, it's hard to scale it back. Bigger is not always better. And so when you have a Hell in a Cell, which is a giant cage with a roof, when you have an Elimination Chamber, which takes it up a few notches, then it's tough to go back to a regular cage match and get excited about it because you've seen bigger, you've seen more action, and so it loses its aura. But back in the 80s, back in the golden era of wrestling, like you said, it was the only gimmick match. It was the original gimmick match. A steel cage. It was designed to punish, to inflict pain, to tear skin, to cause bleeding. And so when you saw that cage go around the four sides of the ring, you knew that feud, that angle had been escalated to the tippy top. It couldn't go beyond this. This was going to settle everything, locking two men inside the cage. Two men enter, one man leave. It was the ultimate battleground to resolve a feud in the world of wrestling. And when you saw that steel cage going up as a fan, Like, you got excited. You felt the goosebumps and the hairs on your arm stand up because you were excited. My question to you, Tommy, is as a child, you had the honor and privilege of going to a bunch of shows. Do you have any memory of being at a show, whether it be a house show or a tape show, and seeing the 15-foot high steel cage going up around the ring? Do you have any memories of seeing that firsthand as a kid?
Oh, hell yeah, man. Many times I've seen a steel cage match. Like I said, back when I was a kid, they would run monthly at the Brendan Byrne Arena at the Meadowlands. It went on to become Continental Airlines, Izod Center, et cetera. But back then it was Brendan Byrne Arena, and they had a lot of steel cage matches back in the day. I remember seeing Hogan and Adrian Adonis. I remember seeing, there was a lot. I'd have to Google and look at old lineups of WWF at the Meadowlands, but I never missed a show. My parents took me every month as a kid. So yeah, there was many times I saw steel cage matches there, and the cool thing was back then, being a kid, Jay, you know, when you first get into the arena, you give them your tickets, you go in, you go to the souvenir stand, of course, first, to get your T-shirts and your programs and merchandise, etc. And I'm sure my parents must have loved that because I wanted everything. I'm sure you did, and everybody else did too. I would want it even more now, man, if they can produce that merchandise. So yeah, you go in, you go to the concession stand and get your your food and your program and your drinks and all that stuff, souvenirs. And then when you got into the arena to go get to your seat before the show starts, you look up and you see a cage hanging over the ring. Oh no, that wasn't. They didn't do that back then. They built the cage. What am I talking about? I'm thinking, you got me thinking Hell in the Cell. But back then, I lost my train of thought. What I want to say, what was cool was you got to have them watch them put up the steel cage before the main event. They would take an intermission or say we'll be right back, and they would put up the steel cage. And it was so cool to watch them put up the steel cage because you knew that two wrestlers were about to go in there and collide. What I want to say about the hanging steel cage is, it was cool for today's generation to go to the arenas and see that cage hanging up. But when we were kids, we'd actually get to see them build the cage around the ring. So I think that we definitely had a special connection to that steel cage because we actually got to see them put it up when we went there live. So it made you more excited for it.
And anytime you're at a live wrestling show, there's electricity in the air. It just feels, you can feel it. It feels different in that environment. But then when you see the cage being brought out and put together, like the electricity in the air, it grows. It's just a different feeling. And you're about to witness something special, something unique. And so it was an aspect of pro wrestling in the 80s that it took an already enjoyable product and it kicked it up a notch, and I love everything about it. And the history of cage matches, they start with basically chicken wire, then they move to like a chain link fence, and then at least in the World Wrestling Federation, they went to the big blue steel cage, and then they're back to like a chain link fence style. But let's just talk about that big blue steel cage that we remember so vividly from our childhood, Tommy. Its first television appearance showed up at WrestleMania 2 for the Hogan-Bundy match. The storyline reason for the cage change was Bundy was such a big, bad dude that they needed a heavy-duty cage to contain him. The real reason had more to do with chain link fence cages are just tough for big wrestlers to climb. And at this time, you had to escape the cage to win. Both feet had to hit the ground to be declared the winner, either through the door or over the top. And Bundy wasn't going to be climbing a chain link fence. Hogan was athletic, but he's a heavy dude, so the blue steel made it easier for him as well. Give me your take, buddy. You know that I love the blue steel cage. I put it above every other cage I've ever seen. What are your thoughts on that particular cage design?
The exact same thing you just said, man. Like I loved the big blue steel cage. I know we're being biased. We're gonna get to you. It just for our era, it was larger than life. Seeing that as opposed to the old steel cages, what they looked like. And great fun fact trivia, Jay, by bringing that up, because that's exactly the reason why they introduced the big blue steel cage was because of King Kong Bundy. Now, I was doing a little research before this episode, Jay, about steel cage matches. The original steel cage was very, very similar to what a UFC cage looks like, and they would put that in the center of the ring. They did this from 1937 to the 1960s. I'm looking at this picture now. I'm going to have to post it on our 80s wrestling social media platforms later today, just to give you an idea of what it used to look like. But the first steel cage match was in 1937, June 25th to be precise, in Atlanta, Georgia, a match between Jack Bloomfield and Count Rossi. That was the first ever steel cage match. And that circle cage that they put inside the ring lasted until the 60s, where then they introduced another cage, which would be like a wiring type of it would be like kind of wiring instead of like the chains instead. And they did a lot of steel cage matches in the 60s and the 70s, and then they go on to make the cage look more modernized as a cage. And then, I mean, the game changer for me with steel cage matches, and I guess we can get into this now, was seeing Jimmy Superfly Snuka climb on top of that steel cage and jump off of it. That to me is what really put steel cages on the map. What's your take on that?
That is such an iconic moment in the history of wrestling, and we can all visualize that. Jimmy Snuka flying from the top of the steel cage, delivering his Superfly splash. And wrestlers like Mick Foley do a great job of saying, like, that's a moment that lives in their brain, and that's one of the moments that motivated him to become a wrestler, because of the way Jimmy Snuka captivated the crowd during that move. And again, this is an example of bigger is not always better, less is sometimes more. Jimmy Snuka, when he would do that move from the top turnbuckle, that was fun to watch. That was intense. And then when he took it up, and he just didn't climb to the top and do the move as like a throwaway high spot. He climbed to the top rope, and then he turned and he kind of looked at the top of the cage, and the crowd started buzzing. People started getting on their feet, and then he climbed to the top and stood on it and flashed his hand symbols, and then he leapt into the air. It is such an iconic moment in professional wrestling that unfortunately is hard to reproduce today, because there's so many high flyers and so many impressive aerial moves that simply splashing from the top of the cage probably would not get the same reaction as it did then. But that is a moment that lives in the minds of wrestling fans, because that was something you never saw before. You don't see every day. It was unique. It was a big move. It has its place in wrestling history, Tommy.
Absolutely, man. And we have to make mention, another thing that has its place in wrestling history in the 80s is the NWA War Games, which was an unbelievable concept that they came up with in 1987. And they debuted it on July 4th of all days at the Great American Bash. And it was designed by Dusty Rhodes, the War Games, and it was specifically designed for battles between the Four Horsemen and, the babyfaces, led by Dusty Rhodes, et cetera, on that side. And, that concept stayed around for many, many years. And, all the way to, 2000, where they did it. And then, War Games was brought back a couple of years back by, NXT. which, I'm happy they did because it was an amazing concept. It has name value. You hear war games, especially if you're an old school wrestling fan, that captivates you, hearing that war games. And me being a WWF fan, a gigantic WWF fan from back in that day, and you were Team WWF all the way, there was only certain things that would make you turn your head when you didn't watch NWA on a regular basis, and that for sure was one of them that you would be interested in seeing, because it was something totally different than what WWF was doing at the time, and it was cool. There's not just one ring, there's two rings, and there's a cage big enough for both rings. Like, they one-upped the concept, and it was very successful, and I'm happy to see them still doing it in today's day and age.
Listen, that I am a WWF guy. That's what I grew up on. I loved World Wrestling Federation. But I will be honest with you. If we're talking the greatest cage matches of all times, I would say the majority of them take place outside of the World Wrestling Federation. The NWA knew how to do cage matches that were great storytelling. They had guys like Ric Flair, Kerry Von Erich. They had guys who were great wrestlers, who could tell a story, and they weren't limited by being put into a cage. It enhanced their stories. The blood, the color that Ric Flair used to get in that blonde hair of his in a cage match. Great cage matches, NWA. The War Games. I just got done saying that bigger is not always better. This might be the exception to the rule, because it was so innovative at the time to have the two rings, the cage with the top on, similar to Hell in a Cell. But I don't know, man. It felt special at the time. And then when you would go back to just a regular cage match, it didn't seem like you were missing out on anything. So I don't know what about the War Games was able to go bigger, but yet make it meaningful and make it enjoyable. I feel much better about a War Games match than I do about Hell in a Cell or Elimination Chamber compared to the old Big Blue. But the NWA, when it came to cage matches, had some of the all-time best, Tommy.
Absolutely, man. And like I said, I'm Team WWF with you back then as a kid. So yeah, you have to take off your hat and tip it to portions outside of the WWF, because like you just mentioned, probably the famous and most classic and bloodiest steel cage matches probably took place outside of WWF. I mean, and you look at Puerto Rico. How about some of the bloodbaths between, say, Abdul the Butcher and Carlos Colon in steel cage matches, or other bloody steel cage matches there? Or you look at the NWA, Ric Flair and Harley Race at Starrcade 83, or, Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard at Starrcade 85, or like you just mentioned, Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair when they had that Christmas Star Wars in 1982. So, or the Wrestle Rock, I remember AWA Wrestle Rock 86, it was the Road Warriors against the Birds. I mean, there's so many classic matches outside of WWF that was steel cage matches, and not to take anything away from WWF, because they put on some great steel cage matches as well. And like you mentioned, the one with Hogan and Bundy from WrestleMania 2, which was the introduction of the blue steel cage. That match was so, and is still so, underrated. And I'm so happy that you brought up that point that they introduced the blue steel cage because of Bundy. For that, and I know I've mentioned this on the show in the past, and I sound like a broken record at this point, but I gotta say, I can't believe Bundy's not in the WWE Hall of Fame, especially considering that he was the main event of WrestleMania 2, and that blue steel cage, man, it brings back great memories. Hogan and Orndorff that we just mentioned about at the top of the program, but about Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant inside a steel cage at WrestleFest 88. Man, imagine if that was, I know they went a different direction with the title tournament at WrestleMania 4, but imagine that didn't happen and they did the Hogan-Andre rematch, which they did in the actual tournament itself. But imagine taking that Hogan-Andre blue steel cage match and putting that as the main event of WrestleMania 4, a rematch with Hogan and Andre, but this time it's in the cage. Man, that would have been a gigantic selling point for that show if they didn't have the title tournament.
Even if they had the title tournament, they eliminated Andre and Hogan from that. And so I know fans would have felt probably shortchanged if Hogan wasn't at least part of that tournament. But you could have kept the tournament and just had Hogan and Andre have a separate co-main event where they're in the cage, because seeing those two guys locked inside that cage is enough to drive tickets, whether it be for the championship or not. There's something special about seeing that blue cage put up, and then when you put two of your biggest superstars in that ring, like seeing Andre the Giant inside the blue steel cage, like nobody wants to be locked in the cage with Andre. Now, granted, at this time, he's not as mobile as he once was. He's not climbing over the cage by any means, but just envisioning the damage that can be inflicted in that cage with Andre is something that would draw fans. And anytime you put Hogan in the cage during this time period, you're going to sell tickets. And so I would have loved to see it been part of WrestleMania 4, even if the tournament played out the way it did without those two being involved.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. What's your favorite of all time steel cage match? If you only had to pick one.
Man, and as I was researching and thinking about this, it is so hard to pick your favorite cage match of all times, because there's parts of multiple cage matches that you really like. There's great storytelling in some. Other things you like the finish, how they do the finish, like the Orndorff-Hogan finish is such a good finish. I liked the Warrior Rude cage match at SummerSlam. The Hogan-Bundy one is fun to watch. There's footage of like a Warrior Savage cage. Hogan Bossman's a good one. Then you get No Holds Barred when Savage and Zeus and Hogan and Brutus in the cage. Like, there's just so many fun ones to pick from that it's hard to choose a favorite. I will tell you this, no matter who's going in the cage, one of the things I miss about the Big Blue Cage is the promos that they used to do before, where they would actually have a section of blue cage hanging in front of the wrestler, and they're cutting a promo. And Hogan does a great one on Boss Man, but I think the best one of all time is Zeus and Savage with Sensational Sherry climbing the cage and coming down and crawling from behind and popping up. Like, they were just so entertaining, and I think that's what cage matches now, they miss that build-up, the anticipation, the excitement, the entertainment portion. Do you remember those promos, Tommy, that I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but they used to do that, Jay, for the live event shows, too, the house shows. I know that you only got wrestling once every 10 years out in Minnesota where you're at, but up here where I'm at, they would film, the promos for the local market. So just say there was a six-man cage match coming to the arena with the British Bulldogs and Tito Santana against so-and-so. You would see those three behind the regular fenced steel cage cutting their promo for later that night at the arena. So they did that a lot, where they would tape interviews standing behind the cage to build up the match. And it was super cool to watch it then. It's super cool to watch it now. And again, it's just another thing that's missing from today's era of professional wrestling that we, gravitate and hold on to from back in the day. And you're talking about matches that I saw live that were in the steel cage, Jay. One that I remember, I just thought of, was actually in Madison Square Garden. I remember being there to see superstar Billy Graham against the Natural Butch Reed inside of a steel cage I saw.
That would be a great match to see live and in person. Do you remember who went over?
I don't, but I also remember, now that I'm starting to think about it, I remember seeing, and it was the main event at the Meadowlands Arena. It was George the Animal Steele against Dangerous Danny Davis inside of a steel cage, and it was sold out. That was the main event of the show. It was George Steele and Danny Davis in the steel cage. And a quick shameless plug, I want to mention that we were actually having Dangerous Danny Davis return to be a special guest referee at our return ISPW wrestling show. Anyone that lives in the New Jersey area, this was my 90s independent promotion, ISPW, Independent Superstars Professional Wrestling. We're coming back this Labor Day weekend on Sunday, September the 5th. It's going to be in Butler, New Jersey at Memorial Field. We have all the information for it up on, and you want to see the poster for it also, it's up on our website, 80'swrestlingcon.com. But Danny Davis is actually going to be a special guest referee for one of the matches, which is going to be super cool.
So George the Animal Steele gets locked inside the cage with Dangerous Danny Davis. It's the main event. I can only assume that George the Animal Steele picks up the win here. Or maybe you don't even remember.
No. He definitely did.
Yeah, he definitely picks up the win here, and that's the main event of the card. It's just it doesn't matter who you see inside the steel cage at this point in time. Like, just the fact that the cage is going up builds that anticipation, and you know you're seeing something special. Do you have a cage match that pops into your head from this era, Tommy, that may not be your favorite, but it's definitely one that you're like, I remember this, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching it?
Absolutely, man. You mentioned one of them earlier, was Hulk Hogan against the Big Boss Man inside of a steel cage. Those guys, they just worked great together. Boss Man was, in my opinion, the perfect opponent for Hogan. He was, really, really big, young, agile for his size. Made Hulk Hogan look like $1 million. His bumping was great. His selling was great. Everything was great about the Boss Man, Hogan. And I remember vividly, like it was yesterday, with them both on the top rope and, Hogan superplexing, the Big Boss Man off of the top of the steel cage. You never, ever, ever saw that back then in that time frame. So to see them do that inside of the cage, that's one of the when I think of the big blue steel cage, that's one of the first things that I think of is Hogan, superplexing Big Boss Man, and then obviously when the regular steel cage matches, Snuka doing the splash off the top of the cage, and I can remember I used to do a lot of autograph sessions with Snuka back in the day when I was younger. He lived in New Jersey and was local, so I used him on a bunch of stuff. You could have 10 pictures at the table for fans to choose from. Studio shots, a couple action shots, the cage picture, and I would say probably 8 times out of 10, Jay, maybe 9 times out of 10, the fans were picking the picture of him standing on top of the cage. I noticed that a lot. I did quite a few autograph sessions with him. And the fans always, definitely advocated towards that picture the most.
I probably would have picked that same picture as well. I mean, how can you not? That is such an iconic image of Superfly, and it's so tied to his career. When you think of his career, that's probably the top memory that comes to mind. When you go back and talk about Boss Man Hogan in that cage and doing that suplex spot, this was a time where you didn't see Hogan go to the top rope ever. You didn't see Boss Man go to the top rope ever. And so when Hogan's standing on the top rope and Boss Man, he's coming off the top of the cage and a full suplex to the center of the ring, like, it didn't get any bigger or more spectacular. You didn't need to see a 450 flip, whatever, off the top rope. Like, that was as good as it gets at that time. And one of the things I love about the big blue steel cage is the giant openings made it easier for them to climb, but it also made it easier for you as fans to kind of see the action that's inside rather than looking through a chain link fence. And it makes the photos from that time period so much better. as you were talking, I Googled Hogan Bossman Steel Cage, Google images, and just the photos that they were able to capture of these two guys inside the cage during this battle are some amazing photos, which is another reason why I think the blue cage is awesome, because you get these cool, uninterrupted photos inside the ring with the cage in the background. But that is definitely one of my memories of the blue steel cage as well, as Hogan Bossman. And another one is when Hogan was coming down to the ring, and I think it was the face Bossman maybe, and Zeus was standing guard at the door when No Holds Barred came out. Were you weren't there during that, were you, Tommy?
No, but I mean, shit, man, I remember that like it was yesterday too. And again, we mentioned this on a past episode. I was scared as a kid when, you know, Zeus showed up to the WWF, because, you know, you saw the movie and you thought it was the end of the guy, but now it's not a movie anymore. He's here. He's in the WWF. He's coming after our guy and our belt. So yeah, as a kid, man, I was petrified when Zeus showed up to the WWF. And that's another thing that, you know, back then they used the cage for that. It was a great way to build more anticipation for that storyline and that angle. And yeah, man, there's so many memories. We can probably sit down and rattle off tons, and especially if we start doing some research on it, tons of, you know, different steel cage matches throughout the years. And you know, it's hard to narrow down what your top one is, or top ones are, because there were so many of them. You remember there's, you know, NWA, AWA, WCCW, the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. I mean, there's a lot of different cage matches throughout the years, and how the cage match evolved into what it is today. You know, a regular steel cage match is given away on Raw now for free, sporadically, whenever they decide to do a steel cage match. They did one at WrestleMania with Braun and Shane. That was a steel cage match, right? This past year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they did use it, you know, as a gimmick match, as a selling point for this past year's WrestleMania. But like I said, with there being a Hell in a Cell, with there being a War Games, with there being Elimination Chamber, a regular steel cage really doesn't seem too impressive or important if you stack them up. How today's, you know, generation has been brought up with all these different concepts outside of a traditional steel cage. So when you do get it, it really doesn't really mean anything anymore, unfortunately. I wish that they can go back and maybe put together a video package, you know, showcasing some of the greatest steel cage matches in the history of wrestling, and, you know, reintroduce that concept to make it mean something again, and make it more important again. But again, in my opinion, as long as you have these other, you know, bigger and these bigger cage concepts, it's going to fall down the totem pole.
Let me ask you this, Tommy. When around the early 80s, when the Big Blue came into play, the only way to win a cage match was by exiting the cage, either through the door, over the top. Both feet had to hit the ground. You were declared the winner. I think they've adjusted it to where now pinfalls and submissions can win a cage match as well. What is your preferred method of victory when it comes to a cage match?
First of all, I think that new concept sucks. I think that the only way a cage match should end is, you know, like I said, back then a cage match was a heated rivalry coming to a head, and the only way to win that match is escaping the cage to get away from your opponent. And the other opponent's job was to do everything in his power to make sure his opponent did not leave that cage. Now it was pin or submission inside of the cage. Talk about watering down. Like it's equivalent to NWO adding 15 more members after the initial couple, in my opinion. Why put together a match where two guys are forced to be inside of a cage together where they can win the match the way a regular match can be won. So to me, it just and that's another point, Jay. That's why another reason why, in my opinion, why a regular steel cage match has lost its luster is because you can win the match the same way you can win a regular match. It doesn't make sense.
I completely agree with you. I think the only way to win a cage match is, like you said, you're locking these two guys in a cage for a reason. They're that heated. They hate each other that much, and this is the only way to solve it. And so if you're just going to have a pin or a submission, you can do that in a regular match. A cage should be 2 men enter, only the victor leaves, and the loser's left in the ring having to collect himself. Let's talk a little bit.
Real quick, I want to say, and I'm booking off the top of my head. I didn't put no thought into it whatsoever. I'm just thinking. I'm thinking out loud right now. Just say you had, something happened where Roman Reigns was cutting a promo saying how he, is the greatest guy to ever come out of NXT, and how he was the star of the Shield, and how Ambrose and Seth Rollins were just riding his coattails. Whatever the angle is, which gets Seth Rollins to come out and he can go babyface and feud with Roman for the title, and you have Seth get fucked. They work another match. Seth gets fucked again by Heyman. Another one. You think this time Seth definitely has it. He gets fucked again by Heyman. Now it gets to the point where the only way this match can officially happen without interference is putting these guys inside of a cage where Paul Heyman cannot be involved in this match whatsoever. Like I'm literally thinking out loud. I'm not putting any time or effort into this storyline, but I'm just using it as an example. A cage match can mean something if you present it in a way where it means something. I mean, wrestling fans are a lot smarter now, both mentally and looking at the dirt sheets and the websites and all that stuff. So they know more. But you can still, if the story is right, you can still guide them in the direction that you want to guide them in 2021. It can be done. You have to be able to tell a compelling story though to get there. And if you tell a story behind two guys, whoever they are, having such hatred for each other and such despise for each other, and we need to have this come to an end. And the only way to do that is by putting them inside of a cage, locked, shut. And the only way that two men enter, one man leave, it's not a hard concept to sell. I don't get it.
It's good storytelling takes time, and I think in today's world, everyone's so worried about people choosing to watch other things or losing fans. That they hesitate to take the time to tell stories, when really that's what true wrestling fans hunger for. We want storytelling that brings us into the storyline, that makes us care about it. That's what separates wrestling from the 80s and the 90s from now, is we're just not invested because there's nothing to invest in. Great storytelling takes time, and that's what we hunger for. Now, let me ask you this, Tommy. Not known for tremendous in-work ability is the Ultimate Warrior, but he had his great run, and he has his place in wrestling history. He had one of the most famous WWF cage matches at SummerSlam 90 against Rick Rude. Here's what I loved about it, is we saw Rick Rude feud with Warrior over the IC title. And so now when Warrior captures the grand prize, the world title, Rick Rude, of course, comes knocking. He wants to reignite this feud, and we've seen it. And so what do? They lock them inside a steel cage. And Rick Rude is one of the best workers in the history of the business. They have a great cage match. What are your thoughts about this match from SummerSlam 1990, Rude Warrior steel cage.
I loved it, man. It was awesome. And Rick Rude was a great opponent for Ultimate Warrior. They had a really good run. As you remember, you know, the pose down between those two, which was at the start of their feud. Those guys worked really good with each other. It just goes to show you how good of a worker Rick Rude was. But yeah, that's the perfect example. Like that feud lasted a while. It went from them doing the pose down to Rick Rude, you know, beating him for the title, and then, you know, Warrior becomes the champion. Now they're, you know, having, you know, another match. So yeah, I mean, that was a perfect climax for that storyline. Was a steel cage match with those two. Well, that's a perfect example.
Did we ever see? And if we saw it and I'm not thinking of it, you're gonna make me feel inadequate here. But did we ever see a Savage Hogan one-on-one blue cage match?
I'm not sure if it was a blue cage match, but I remember they had cage matches in the past. I believe it was a regular steel cage match. I've seen it in the past. I might have been there live.
I know they did it in WCW. I know they did the Zeus Savage Hogan Beefcake one. I just can't. That would have been a great blow off to a feud, having Hogan Savage inside the cage around that WrestleMania 5 time. That would have been fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. That would have been a lot of fun. But yeah, they definitely did Hogan and Savage in cage matches. And it just came to my head too, thinking about cage matches. I remember seeing Hulk Hogan against the One Man Gang in a steel cage match, also at the Meadowlands Arena when I was a kid, and just trying to remember where it was that I know definitely Hogan wrestled Big John Studd in a steel cage match too at the Meadowlands Arena. I don't know if it was at the Meadowlands, but if you look back in old magazines, there's definitely photos of Hogan and Savage in a cage.
I'll have to go and do some digging and see if I can find those. I would love to watch some Hogan Savage in a cage match. You mentioned Big John Studd. When we get close to wrapping up, I just was taking a look at the poster for your ISPW show coming up, and you've got a nice homage to Big John Studd happening on that card that I want to talk to you about. What other cage matches, like, just when you say cage match from this era, we talked about some good ones already. We acknowledged that the best cage matches took place probably outside of the World Wrestling Federation, with other superstars in other areas. But any other one that just jumps to the forefront of your brain?
I mean, I think we covered, you know, a lot of them. You know, I think the most for me, the one that I remember the most wasn't necessarily the greatest steel cage match of all time. Like you said, a lot of those happen outside of the WWF, but probably my favorite, just, you know, from that time frame being a child, was that Hogan Paul Orndorff steel cage match, because it was prime time, man. It was on Saturday night's main event. It was a pretty big deal, and like you said, you know, the risk they took with I mean, what happens if Orndorff, you know, jumped 3 seconds sooner than he was supposed to, and what would happen? They would have to. I mean, it was taped back then, but they would have probably redid it. But for the live audience to see that, so I mean, they did a really great job building that up. But yeah, I guess for me, man, just because I'm from that WWF golden era time frame from 86 or 85 to 92, like a lot of us are, that blue steel cage was, you know, the most memorable for me.
And I would say, you know, like you said, it was taped, so they probably could have redone it if they needed to, but then you don't get the live reaction that you got. The fans have seen it. They understand what you're trying to do, so they're not going to give you the same excited response that we got. And so the fact that they rolled the dice, and not only that, but that they trusted each other, because either Hogan or Orndorff could have intentionally dropped first, you know, but they did it perfectly. And they have that clip where they splice the tape together side by side and you see both their feet on the ground and they got the time stamp above it. It's such a cool photo, such a piece of wrestling history. And I agree. To me, the blue steel cage is what pops to mind when I think about cage matches. Not only because I grew up in this era and that's what I saw on TV, but like the LJN ring came with a blue steel cage, and it just captures that moment in time that we fell in love with the sport. And so I absolutely love the blue steel cage. Any parting thoughts on cage matches before we talk about what you have coming up? Because you have some very cool stuff coming up at the Wrestling Collector and your wrestling show, and also a virtual signing at the end of the month that I'm looking forward to.
Thanks, man. No, I think I hit the nail on the head about how I felt about steel cage matches back then, how it could still mean something to this day if you program it into the fans' head the right way. But yeah, man, I mean, steel cage matches was a gigantic part of our childhood from the 80s, looking back on our memories. And, we just, reminisced about some of them today. So I think it would be real cool if all of us, me and you too, Jay, and the listeners tonight, when you're relaxing at home, on your phone, scrolling through your whatever outlets you use social media for, jump on YouTube real quick and type in a steel cage match from the 80s, and everyone, let's all watch a steel cage match tonight.
I dig it. Absolutely.
Or whenever you're listening to this.
That's right. All right, let's jump into what you have coming up this month, heading into the end of the summer, when it comes to your world of 80s wrestling. The first thing I know that is on the top of the 80s wrestling page when you go there is you have a couple of female superstars coming in person to the Wrestling Collector. Tell me about it, Tom. Are you excited about this?
No, I'd rather look at Brooklyn Brawler and Bastion Booger. Hell yeah. Yeah, we have Summer Rae and Tanel Dashwood's going to be at the store doing a signing next Saturday, which is Saturday, July the 24th, at the Wrestling Collector, located at 2772 State Route 23 in Stockholm, New Jersey, 30 minutes north of Wayne, New Jersey. For those that don't live in the area, I might not be familiar with it. It's only 30 minutes north of Wayne, Stockholm, New Jersey. Summer Rae and the former Emma will be there with UFC legend Dan the Beast Severin. All three of them will be signing autographs, taking pictures at the Wrestling Collector on July 24th. Now, we just found out the following week, on Sunday, August 1st, we are going to have The Godfather / Papa Shango live in the store, signing autographs and taking pictures on Sunday, August 1st, and then the virtual signing with him for all of our, regular customers on 80swrestlingcon.com. That'll be on Monday. So we're doing in-store with him on Sunday, the live virtual with him on Monday, August 2nd. And then the following week after that at the Wrestling Collector on August the 7th, Saturday, August the 7th, we're going to have WWE Hall of Famer Greg the Hammer Valentine is going to be at the Wrestling Collector as well. So we got 3 weeks in a row of signings at the Wrestling Collector. Again, July 24th, the girls with Dan Severin. On August the 1st, we are going to have The Godfather. And on August the 7th, we're going to have Greg the Hammer Valentine. Virtual signing-wise going, our next one is the end of this month, the last Monday of July, with Dean Malenko. That's going to be a really, really, really interesting one. He hasn't done too much stuff that I'm aware of, so it'd be real cool to have him. And then our August for our virtual signings, man, are just off the chains. We have The Godfather on the 2nd of August. We have Mark Merrow on August 16th. And then August 27th, the big one, Jay, Virtual Mania 2 Attitude. We are going to have Mark Henry, Billy Gunn, D'Lo Brown, and the Headbangers, all on Sunday, August the 22nd. It's an all-day-long signing, Virtual Mania 2.
This is a crazy summer for you, Tommy, and for wrestling fans. The amount of talent you were able to book for this summer absolutely blows my mind, and it's all leading up to your return of the ISPW Independent Superstars of Pro Wrestling show that you have taking place in September. Let's talk real quick about this show. You've got not one, you've got a handful of WWE Hall of Fame legends. You got Sergeant Slaughter making an appearance. You got Rikishi making an appearance. You have Dangerous Danny Davis guest refereeing a match on the card. You've got Gilbert scheduled to appear, Crowbar. You've got so many big names. You've got Samu and his nephew Lance, the Samoans. And the thing that jumped out at me when you sent me this poster this morning is you have Big John Studd's son, Big Sean Studd, in a $10,000 body slam challenge, Tommy?
Hey, man, ISPW falls under the 80's Wrestling Con brand. So I have to instill some 80's wrestling into ISPW, not only with just the talent, but you're going to see other aspects of 80's wrestling, the stuff that we're missing, the stuff that we want, the stuff that we remember as a kid. I'm going to give it to you in ISPW. So if you live anywhere in the New Jersey area, definitely come out Labor Day weekend on Sunday, September the 5th, Butler, New Jersey. All the information for it is on our website, 80'swrestlingcon.com. Yeah, we're going to do a $10,000 body slam challenge with Big John Studd's son, Big Sean Studd, who will have his manager, and the man putting up the money, the winner, Andy Weinberg. So that's going to be one of the feature attractions at the Return ISPW show. And as you mentioned, Sergeant Slaughter and Rikishi will both be doing meet and greets at the event. You can get an autograph and or photo with them. And also Samu will be teaming with his son Lance, and they will be taking on a tag team that is pretty well known up this way called The Now. You're going to have Gilbert going one-on-one with Matt Striker. We're going to have, yes, the Matt Striker from WWF back in the day. We are going to have Crowbar, former WCW star, taking on LSG, who is a hot rising star in Ring of Honor. We are also going to see, for the ISPW women's title, to crown the first ever champion, Vicious Vicky goes one-on-one with Gabby Ortiz. Vicious Vicky, you might know her as the host of all the 80's Wrestling Con virtual signing pre-shows. She will be in action against Gabby Ortiz. The special guest referee for this match, Jay, will be legendary woman wrestler, and she was in the WWF as well, Heidi Lee Morgan will serve as a special guest referee for this match. And like I mentioned, Dangerous Danny Davis, he will be the special guest referee for a match pitting Bull James going one-on-one with main event Michael Mars. Bull James is the former Bull Dempsey in NXT. Fantastic performer. I've known him since he was 18 years old, maybe even a little bit younger. And let me tell you something, what you've seen him do in NXT, it feels in comparison to what he can do in that ring. So if you haven't had a chance to see Bull Dempsey wrestle outside of the WWE umbrella, I can promise you you're in for a treat. This big man can go. He can move. He knows that ring like the back of his hand, and he knows the business like the back of his hand. So he'll be in action against Michael Mars. And Michael Mars is a old 90s wrestler in this area. He was trained by Iron Mike Sharp. He did a lot of extra work for WWF back in the early 90s, enhancement talent, whatever you want to call it. Anytime that they were up this way, Mike Sharp would bring a lot of his students to these tapings for WWF and use them as enhancement talent. And Michael Mars, by his real name or different name, was an enhancement guy a lot in WWF. And he's someone that I'm extremely high on. He's a great worker. He's being repackaged with a new name, Main Event Michael Mars. He's got a ton of experience, and this match is going to be really, really good between these two guys. And Danny, like I said, will be the special guest referee for this match. And you never know with me, Jay. You might see a surprise or two as well at the return ISPW show.
Well, Tommy, don't you be surprised if you see a private helicopter land outside of your show at the Richard Butler School, and I step out in my red, white, and blue shirt, and I climb into the ring with 7 feet, 300-pound Sean Studd, and I press him over my head, brother. I'm coming home with that $10,000.
I'll tell you what, Jay. I think as soon as we end this conversation, as soon as this episode is posted, I think you should go and purchase your ticket. Tell your wife, listen, I know it's Labor Day weekend. Tell her you have a very, very, very important business meeting in New Jersey that you need to be a part of. Come up, and we'll have you as the first participant. I'm shooting. I'm not kidding around. You'll be the first participant in the $10,000 Body Slam Challenge. I can't do the helicopter. I don't have your kind of money, but I can definitely have you be the first guy to try and Body Slam Sean Studd if you want to be a part of the show.
Don't tell me, brother.
Just throwing it out there, bro.
Listen, man, I would spend $9,999 to get myself there just so I can come out ahead with that $1 bill after press slamming this giant of a man over my head.
Hey, listen, we can make a weekend of it, man. And the day before on Saturday, we could do a 80s wrestling trivia at the store with me and you hosting it. So
you've given me food for thought, my man.
Dude, let's do it. I'd love to have you up there, brother.
Into coming out to the East Coast, brother.
You give me your answer next week, dude. You have 7 days and 7 nights to think about it, dude. You let me know next Thursday, right here.
I'm down. You got it, man.
You fucking come to the New Jersey for the ISPW. I'll meet you there. You come, I'll meet you there. I fucking put you in the can of clutch. Fucking Body Slam Challenge. Iron Chick Challenge, motherfucker. No more question.
If you put Jumpin' Jay against Tommy Sheik inside a cage on that card, I was just teasing, man. You're giving me food to think about. I will think about it for the next 7 days, and I'll let you know. Otherwise, this Saturday, you could get sued by Disney, but you got the Beauties and the Beast live and in person at the Wrestling Collector. Got some huge virtual signings coming up over the course of this month and next. I'm excited to see everything you're bringing to the table, Tommy. We love it, man. 80s wrestling fans love what you're doing. Keep up the good work, my man.
Thanks, Bo. And just so you know, I'm definitely stealing that Beauties and the Beast. I'm
yeah, Dan the Beast ever. You got a couple of beauties coming to the table. Beauties and the Beast.
I love it.
Do it, man.
I'm doing it right now as we speak.
Multitasking. I love it.
I'm legit. I'm making a Facebook invitation right now, and I'm doing live in-store signing. Beauties and the Beast with. I'm doing it right now as we speak.
Do it, man. I love it. All right, man. Anything else?
No, man. That's all, man. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I know we're getting right in the middle of the summer. Everyone's barbecuing and swimming and having fun. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. Jay, I hope you and your family have a great weekend. And I look forward to your answer next week You have the Labor Day weekend challenge. We can do a 80s wrestling trivia, have you a part of the live ISPW event. I'll have you as a Jay. Jay. I'll even throw this in. I'll make you my play-by-play guy if you sign on the dotted line for ISPW.
Oh my word!
So you can enter the Body Slam challenge, be my play-by-play guy, and do a trivia at the store. Brother, bring the family.
A lot of character, my man.
Labor Day weekend in New Jersey. Bring the whole family.
There you go. Make a family vacation of it. I love it, man.
Until then, I hope everyone has a great weekend. And what do you want to do? What do you want to talk about next week?
That's a great question, man.
You want to talk about Battle Royals?
I want to talk about Battle Royals next week.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Because this was a very, very, very interesting talk, and I think that we could do the same for the importance of Battle Royals back in the day, and again what it entails today and how it evolved. So yeah, man, let's do that. Let's do Battle Royals next week.
Book it. I love it.
All right, guys. Well, we'll catch you next week right here on 80's Wrestling, the podcast.
Tonight, on Saturday night's main event, you big boss man and the Slickster are going to have your day in court, man. You dudes have been passing sentence on everybody around the WWF with your own brand of justice. But now, I'm the new WWF champion, and inside this steel cage, I'm the judge, the jury, and the executioner, brother. I'm going to throw the book at you, man. The training, the prayers, and the vitamins are going up against the handcuffs and the nightsticks. And once I find you guilty, boss man, in the steel cage, what are you going to look like when thousands of my Hulkamaniacs tell the largest arms in the world to push your fat head through the cage, boss man? There will be no mercy. There will be no pardons. I will sentence you to the maximum sentence, a lifetime in eternity at the doom of Hulkamania. What are you going to do, boss man, when Judge Hogan passes the final sentence on